All right,
great.
everyone. Are we ready?
Hi, Mel.
Yes,
She's
we're
out there.
Hi, everyone.
we're ready.
This is the diversity panel. We did have a slide, but apparently we can't use them. So my name is Amy Marrich. I am Spots on the Discord. I am an open source evangelist at Red Hat. And if everyone wants to introduce themselves in order, I'll give you it first.
Hello, I'm Bryce Adelstein Lelbach. I am a principal architect at NVIDIA. I mostly work on programming models and compilers, but I'm also involved in a lot of standards efforts at NVIDIA, and one of them is I am the editor for the US text standards for inclusive terminology.
Good stuff.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Jakin Vela. I'm the executive director of the International Game Developers Association, also known as the IGDA, or the largest nonprofit member-driven association, professional association for game developers. We support and empower game developers all around the world in achieving fulfilling and sustainable careers.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm Nithya Ruff, and I run the open source program office at Amazon. Our job is to really make it dead easy for Amazon developers and builders to work in open source. We nudge them all the time to do the right thing and to be a good citizen in open source. That's our role. I also work in the community in many ways. I represent community on the Linux Foundation board, and I love to build bridges across companies and communities, but also opening doors for different kinds of people and different kinds of contributions into open source.
Awesome. My name's Deb Nicholson. I'm the executive director at the Python Software Foundation, and we provide a vendor-neutral and nonprofit fiscal home for the Python programming language. And we have a global community, and we believe that it's really key for us to invest in making sure that Python is radically welcoming so that we can continue to build that global community.
My name is Steve Jacobs. I'm a faculty member at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where we created one of the first game design and development degree programs in the country. And I also run the program called Open at RIT, which is kind of a hybrid between an industry OSPO, open source programs office, and a digital and open research support entity within the campus.
All righty. So when we were getting this panel ready together, we had the idea of onboarding into open source and how to make it more diverse. Now, Stephen, you mentioned the role diversity and the importance of that in open source. Can you build up a little bit on that?
Sure. So open source projects in general, and my interest in open, if you missed my keynote this morning, my interest in open is open everything. In a university setting, you're working in people who do open software, open hardware, open design, open innovation. They're putting out their teaching materials as open educational resources. They're publishing or starting open access journals. So it goes way beyond software, not to diminish software, but and some of those processes are different. So we didn't call ourselves an open source programs office because we didn't want people to think we were just there to help with software. And we were created by the university, and then we've been funded twice now quite generously by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. And the first 2 years of that funding was to support a fellowship model, not where we gave faculty a check, but we gave them the service of 3 students and a staff member to teach them how to basically open their projects to the world. So by having that open door policy, and that's that wide focus versus a narrow focus, we supported everything from projects in computational astrophysics to projects collecting data on Victorian autobiography, and probably just about everything in between. And because we're game-centric, as O3DE is, at least in part, we're not working just with programmers. You know, there's lots of research and a lot of life experience out there that says too often software projects get so focused on code production that even when they've hired people to do outreach or documentation or whatever, the culture of that particular community is so code-driven that the people they hired to do other stuff feel bad that they're not making more code.
Or just not appreciated.
Well, yeah, we won't even.
And
go
if
there.
you look at your salaries at your organization, they're not wrong.
Yeah.
Like to add to what you were saying, I think when I first joined the free software community, like, you know, it was code. And then I slowly got to meet people who were making this code, and I was like, oh, cool, so how many people are using it? And they're like, I don't know, maybe no one, or maybe just like my friend at work or something. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because you're spending a lot of time on it, but no one knows how to like find it. Or like another one, I looked at this website for a project, and it didn't say what the project did. I'm not going to name them because it's sort of embarrassing. I think they fixed it now, but I said, like, how would you expect anyone as a newcomer to know that this is a tool or whatever they want? And they're like, oh, I mean, if you need it, you know. And I'm like from the womb? Like you're just like, oh, like I've got a tool chain and a URL stamped on my arm on the way out, and he was like, oh, all right, I see what you're saying. Maybe new people can't find it. But so there's a lot of other things to do. Like it's great to build code, but if you want people to use it and find it and figure out how to contribute to it, if you want to have like nice events, then it behooves you to find someone who's actually good at running events to help you set those up and make sure that you have like a vegan lunch and all of those other things that make events nice. There's loads and loads of other things, like we need friendly open source lawyers that know like what we're doing and, you know, understand we're trying to give it all away. So there's like all of these different things that you need to make like an open source project work. And if you tell people like, these are the special people and the rest of you are just here as a bunch of monkeys or whatever, they're not going to stay. And you're going to have constant churn. And eventually you'll have a terrible website, like an event that no one enjoys, and like a software project that no one knows how to use.
And by the way, by recognizing just code contributions, you turn away a lot of people from joining open source and technology because they think, I'm not a coder, I have nothing to contribute, so I'm not welcome here. And our systems are also set up to count and reward coding, right?
Oh, well, the
GitHub
metrics?
stars and metrics and everything. So we've got to change how other contributions are viewed and appreciated and valued.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because you never want an us versus them type situation. So everyone is a contributor in your project, whether they do run an event or they do your documentation. And I think we are getting better at metricing those contributions. Kubernetes includes everyone. OpenStack includes everyone. Chaos does the metricing to make sure that everyone is counted. Now, Deb, you wanted to add on to this a little bit about onboarding. So would you like to go into some detail on that?
Yeah, just a little bit. It is like just kind of on what we were talking about, how people are treated. So when you bring someone in to your organization that isn't working on code stuff, you introduce them around to everybody. It's not like, you know, not that ESR style, like don't bother the coders, they're too important for you to ask them for help or questions. And if you have like all hands, like it really is all hands. It's not like, oh, all our coders are going to do this. Can you go pick up the pizza? And it's like, wait, I work here too. Like, well, am I not going to know what's happening all year? That's weird. So yeah, introducing everybody, making sure they feel included. And then when you thank people for their work, like you thank everyone. So when I was working on Media Goblin, which is a largely volunteer project, we put everyone in the thanks in our release notes. Like, you know, oh, here's a friend who took time to like talk to us about UX for 2 hours. She's in the release notes on that month, you know, and so from beginning to end, they're part of the team. There's not like a separate team or A team, B team. There's just the team.
Now, Jakin, now that we've onboarded them, how do we keep people within the community, especially diverse members of our community?
I would love to speak on that. So Deb mentioned something that kind of triggered something in my mind, and it is that retention aspect. And it can be really challenging when there's not already a foundational model that supports inclusion and diversity on a project or within an organization, because everything really has to tie back to the why, the mission, or the values of the project or the values of the organization. And so when we're talking about kind of retention or making people feel welcomed, et cetera, I think it always starts with community. And when you're saying like someone maybe might not feel like they're a part of that group because they're not a coder, from a sociological lens, that to me kind of falls into the identity aspect of, or a social identity aspect of influence. Someone might not feel like they have influence in a group, and so finding ways to make people have influence and empower people's position to have influence on what they say matters, that's super important. So I talk a lot about community building in games, and when I talk about community building, I talk mainly around 4 pillars. Membership, so that's like boundaries, so we are a part of a group because we are a member of this organization. Influence is how much I can influence the behaviors of the group, the outcomes of our work. And then we have like emotional connection, and I'm blanking on the 4th one now, but that influence is really important when it's kind of skill competency based. So community building through influence. So how do we have more influence in a project? I think a way we can make more influence is by creating sub-communities within our projects or within our larger organization. And something at the IGDA that we do, we have these special interest groups, and I know a lot of organizations have them. And I think that's one way to just make people feel connected, like they have a space there that is really important for them. But that's just one way, and I'd love to hear some other ideas.
So another thing about retention is giving people more and more responsibility for things if they're ready and they want it. And often the people you don't necessarily expect, right, will surprise you. So at RIT, we have individual courses, a collection of 3 courses called an immersion, and then what more people are familiar with is an academic minor, 5 courses. And they have very little to do with software development. They're about making contributions to anything in an open community. And there's multiple doorways in. You can take formal courses, you can get involved in an event, or you can apply for an internship. And one of the greatest examples I have of being able to build those careers is that 3 of Fedora's community managers have come from us. And some of them were really involved in software anyway, but Marie Norden, who's just moved up from community manager to dealing with their codes of conduct and those types of things, right? She's a graphic designer and artist, and she came to start doing logos and stuff at hackathons, and then got an outreachy internship and started doing more graphic arts, and then she got involved in community, and now she's working for one of the biggest open source companies on the planet from having been a graphic artist, right? And it's all about engagement, additional responsibility, more reward, and you end up with someone like that.
It's interesting, the part you didn't mention is helping people find educational opportunities to get to that next level, because you're an educator. So probably it's just in the air you breathe. But I think that's also really important for retention. And especially some of the non-code jobs in open source are really weird. And there might not be a clear, just go and take a class in doing DevRel, or just go and take, a little night course in how to run a booth that doesn't feel like a chaotic mess. I don't know of that. Maybe they'll do it at RIT, but
sure.
But helping people find like the resources that are there, or giving them opportunities to shadow people who are already doing that work is part of that retention and helping people like kind of level up.
Yeah, I think retention is all of what you all mentioned. It's making people feel included and valued. It is giving them educational opportunities. It's also, the representation of people that you see in offices in high levels, right? That gives a hope and opens the doors for people to dream big and know that they can get there as well. And mentorship and sponsorships are so incredibly important, not just within corporate, but in communities. Exactly to your point, I would not know. In one of my first conferences that I attended back in the day, Ricky Hensley or you or one of you were speaking, and I said, "How do I get to speak at a conference, like you?" And I think you all said, "I'll review your abstract, and I'll help you get accepted into a conference." And those are the types of unwritten mentorships and friendships that you need in order to continue.
I have a question from the audience here. Yeah.
Hi. I'm glad to see we have, at least two folks on the panel who are working with the academic organizations. I know Nydia is and Stephen is. And but in reality, this is very interesting. I was at a project discussion group a few months ago, and this particular project is a very mature project, so they desperately need resources to do some of the sustaining work. Mm-hmm. These are the boring work that nobody wants to do, right? Good developers, they want to move on to the next, more interesting stuff, and they struggle. And I said, as an industry, we have a supply and demand issue, right? We can't. Pretty much all the companies I know, they're desperate for talents. They can't, especially in open source. If you're good in a hot project, that's your resume. You can go anywhere you want. And so we have such a shortage of resources, developers. So I'm like, why can't we, get the students, either graduate students, college students, or even high school students, to come get involved in the open source projects? And this is actually a really good resume for them to enter the industry a lot quicker. So from their perspective, it's good. I can see the will. So I made that suggestion to the project, and I got shut down really quickly. They said, been there, done that. The schools, we try to talk to them. It's not working, doesn't work. And I couldn't get an answer why. I think maybe if you can shed some light as why we struggle working with the universities, the colleges. I know if you're UC Berkeley, big schools, they are well connected to open source communities. But what about those second-tier schools, third-tier schools? I mean, there's a lot of kids out there who love to program, but they don't know how. They don't even know about open source.
So there is an organization that's been around for a long time. Their web presence tends to ebb and flow, but there's a group called Teaching Open Source, and it's a lot of those colleges that you're looking at. In some ways, at RIT, I have this double-edged sword, in that RIT is a cooperative education school. They have to get paid internships to graduate, which means they're more reluctant to volunteer because they have to get these other check marks off as well. So I have my first student contributing to O3DE as an independent study. Why programs might have a knee-jerk reaction like that? One is that the schools don't understand or don't have that culture. Another reason is that, especially if you as a project don't vet the interns you're taking in or the volunteers you're taking in really well, you have to put energy in to making them the contributor you want them to be. And a lot of projects aren't willing, or they don't have the cycles where I'm already volunteering to do the stuff I have to do. I got to volunteer to teach this kid so there's that kind of stuff as well.
I also think, like, if you're coming as a company where everyone at your everyone on your staff is making $150K a year, and you're visiting a community college in an under-resourced area and asking them for free labor, the optics of that seem kind of crummy to me. Like, I feel like if it should be a paid internship, unless you want to only get wealthy kids that don't have to work in the summer forever and ever and ever at your company, which, you know, some companies, they will never say it out loud, but some of them do. They are looking for graduates from like 5 schools, which tend to have a really specific demographic. And, you know, but if we're really looking to make open source diverse and we're looking to make our workforces diverse, then we can't ask kids at community colleges to work for us for free in the summer.
And I think one thing we're seeing in the communities I'm involved in, the programs like Google Summer of Code, Outreachy, where those students get paid to participate, we have a bigger return than those that say they want to be mentored and learn things and join the community. They don't stick around. But when there is that pay element, because we used to have people like lined up to mentor people into the community, but the mentees would like show up once and disappear on us.
Yes. Right. And work closer to the universities and colleges. So LF has their own kind of Google Summer Code they call LF Mentors or LF Mentorship. Which one is it, Nicole? Mentorship. There are challenges when Google Summer Code and Outreachy, and I don't know about LF Mentors because they haven't been around as long, but there's kind of a spotty record there on the student end. Again, it's this problem of, are they really mentoring the kids they bring in, even if they're paying them? There's a very rigid structure of hit X amount of your work by this milestone and what the rest of it by this milestone, or you don't get paid. So if a kid has a problem, if there's an issue, they get dropped. It's great when those two programs are great when they work, but their models sometimes get in the way. And I don't think they do any real training of the people who are going to mentor the volunteers. Have they changed that?
Well, I don't know about LF mentorship.
I was talking about the other ones.
Yeah, so Outreachy talks all the time about mentoring and does stipends for mentors. And then the Google Summer Code actually has a whole mentorship summit, which, well, in the before times, I don't know if they've picked back up. But then, and they, you know, Outreachy is very much inspired by the Google Summer of Code, but specifically for vulnerable and marginalized participants. And so, you know, my recollection is that the Outreachy mentors are always welcome to join at the Google Summer of Code Mentorship Summit. And in some cases, they're the same people already.
Yeah.
So it is, I mean, mentoring, you kind of pointed out, is its own skill. And it is like, you know, we're talking about diversity of roles, like, just because you know how to do something doesn't mean you know how to teach someone else to do it. So it's, to mentor is, you know, you have to take that seriously as its own, like, endeavor.
And if I can add just one quick thing, I actually used to run programs creating apprenticeships in companies, not just for open source, but just cybersecurity and IT broadly for community college students. And there's a lot of assumptions that employers or companies or organizations bring into the recruitment aspect and the retention aspect. So the mentorship is a huge one, but they need more structure on what that mentorship needs to look like. But oftentimes the infrastructure within that organization or project just isn't there. And by infrastructure, I mean, you know, how, like, what are the connections between the mentor and mentee going to look like? How many times they're going to meet? Who's owning this relationship? Sometimes it's just, well, this is your mentor, but y'all figure out what to do. And that's not the way for a student mentorship experience. Probably not the best way to go. It actually needs to be a little bit more structured. Like, all right, have one session that starts with just kind of getting to know each other. Session 2, starting with, you know, one goal you want to get out of this project, or one skill you want to really develop from this project, et cetera. And the IGDA has recreated a global mentorship program as well. So if organizations can't find that infrastructure within, then they should certainly look into other organizations that can supplement or support Additionally, kind of going back to the socioeconomic issues that can come up, especially if it's an unpaid internship, a lot of college students have to balance the weight of not only personal life, education life, and if they maybe even have a job, part-time job, then of course that fourth aspect of having a project or working on an internship or something like that, that's a lot of emotional and intellectual labor
Stress.
that they have. Yeah, stress. Bottom line, it's stress. And so there's another component that a lot of employers failed to come to bat for, and that's the personal support of that student. So like the coaching, how to, maybe their technical skills are great. What about those soft skills? How do we help them with those soft skills so that they can communicate better, get along with people better, express frustration, professionally, and not ruin their careers because they have like an outburst or something. So there's so many elements to it. It's a really complex
and to just piggyback on the outburst, the emotional, right? These programs are great and they do what they do, but they none of them, and this goes for a lot of corporate internships overall, very few of them are set up to work with people with disabilities. Especially in the broad context of a Google Summer of Code-like thing, there's an expectation, I said, this much work by this much milestone, by this much whatever. Well, if you type with your feet, you're not going to type as fast as a guy who types with their hands, right? There's the people who would be great as employees with disabilities. There's the delivery expectation. There's the fact they may not have the adaptive equipment they need to get it. You may have to purchase that adaptive equipment for them, right? There's the fact that in the US, at least, most people with disabilities don't go beyond high school, right? And so a lot of those programs are aimed at people who are in college or college graduates. That wipes them out entirely even from consideration. So there's still a lot of opportunity to do a lot more in that space.
Now, Jakin, you mentioned soft skills. And one thing that is related to soft skills and goes back to documentation is the fact that words matter. And in the last couple of years, we've really gotten into the inclusive naming initiative to change some of those words that we just use so commonplace that actually exclude people. Now, Bryce, this is something that's near and dear to your heart. Do you want to talk on it?
Yeah, so I think it's first maybe useful to understand what we mean when we say inclusive terminology. And usually it's best to think about it in terms of what it's not. Inclusive terminology is just not using non-inclusive terminology. So then what exactly is non-inclusive terminology? Usually, the way I think about it is it's when we use language that has connotations, so secondary meanings that were not our original intent, or maybe it was intended in some way, but it has some connotation that to some audience has some negative associations with it. And so it's sort of key here that it's a connotation. It's not the main denotative meaning of the term. It's not necessarily what we were trying to express. And when we're communicating, we of course want to be concise and unambiguous. And so I think everybody would agree that we should try to pick language that's going to have the same meaning to everybody, and that's not going to have the potential to be interpreted in different ways. And that sort of gets to the next point, which is that I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about inclusive terminology, and that a lot of people think that inclusive terminology is this objective thing. Is this term objectively problematic or not? And that is not what matters at all. Inclusive terminology is all about the subjective experience. Whether or not a term has negative connotations is about whether there's a particular audience that experiences those connotations, and that experience is subjective. So the first thing that I think you need to understand is that you can't be having this objective debate. It doesn't matter whether I think that some term is fine. If it causes offense to you, then by definition, because you have said that you've experienced offense with it, then it's something that we should avoid. And there's so many different ways that we can express ourselves, that this is such an easy thing to do, to pick language that is unambiguous and clear and that doesn't have negative connotations. Now, you might ask, how do we go about doing this? And I think the answer is almost always that you have to do research. I've been involved for 2 years now in developing inclusive terminology guidelines and standards, and the majority of what I do is go and look up what's the existing best practice. Like, so if there's a question about, is this term problematic or not? I don't go and think, well, do I believe that it is? No, because it doesn't matter. What my job is not to determine my opinion. My job is to see, is there an audience out there for which there is good evidence that this is a problem? And if there is, then, okay, we should probably avoid using that term. And I think this is the sort of thing that if you are using inclusive terminology in your project, in your documentation, in your code, in your community, you won't necessarily notice it. But if you're using non-inclusive terminology, it will have an impact. And so I think it's a very easy thing to do, because all you have to do is determine whether or not there is any language that's problematic, and then pick a different set of words. We have found in our development of standards and guidelines for this that there's a lot of cases where our guidance isn't, instead of this term, use that term. Oftentimes we'll say things like, maybe you should just rephrase this entirely. I'll give you one example. Talking about accessibility. There are a lot of terms related to accessibility that are problematic. Using the word disabled or disability can often be problematic. And at some point, one of my colleagues who was working on this said to me, well, why did these documents even need to talk about people? Maybe we could just talk about capabilities. And what capabilities do we need to enable? And so I think if you really take a step back when you encounter a non-inclusive term and you think about, maybe the whole way that we're thinking about this and talking about this is unnecessarily introducing, anthropomorphic language into, an IT world where we don't really need it.
And sometimes you're just going to step in it for all the research in the world. Right. So I worked my way through school as a sign language interpreter. And sign languages are different all around the world. And one of my professors taught us this experience he had where he was at a World Federation for the Deaf, a meeting where deaf people from all around the world get together. And he met a gentleman and his wife, and he said, innocently enough, "Oh, you're from Greece." And the man's wife starts to seem very upset. And her husband first looks at her and says, no, he's an American. And then he says, oh, yeah, see, in Greece, that means prostitute. So, sometimes you're just going to have to step in it, learn, make a note, and move forward from there.
And I think the critics of inclusive terminology efforts often think that it's about blame or about telling somebody that you've done wrong, you must apologize. That's really never the goal. The goal is always about preventing harm. Your intention is irrelevant when it comes to inclusive terminology. It really doesn't matter whether or not you meant to cause harm. It doesn't matter whether or not you were familiar with the negative connotations of a term. It doesn't matter what you think about it. It's really just about, is it causing harm to some person or some group of people? And if so, how do we prevent that harm?
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I'm wondering if picking more like denotatively neutral terms instead of ones with a lot of like weird connotative baggage makes those terms more easily understandable by speakers of other languages as well.
I think that's true. When we started off the inclusive terminology effort at Insights, we started off with lists, and I think a lot of orgs start off with lists. These don't avoid these terms, use these replacements. That's a great start, but once you have the lists, you start noticing patterns and trends, and two of the biggest are when you've got language that has metaphors. That is almost always going to have, but like almost by definition, there is a second hidden meaning. And that can lead to negative connotations. It can also be challenging for non-native speakers. Mm-hmm. And one subcategory of that is anthropomorphic language. I would say probably 70 to 80% of the problematic terms in the information technology space come back to attributing human characteristics to things that are not people. And so yes, you can go and look at, lists of words to avoid, but if you try to avoid that, attributing human characteristics to things that are not people, you will, it's better to have the policy than a specific list. Yeah, and I do think that it really does lead to making your documentation, your source code, all of your communication a lot clearer and more concise and less ambiguous, and that's helpful for all audiences, especially those who may not have the same command of the language as a native speaker.
So we've gone through everything from the different roles that are diverse that bring people into open source, how to onboard them, how to keep them, and even inclusive languages, encouraging people to join because they feel welcome. Now, Nithya, you're going to speak about open source and companies. And in some ways, that's the next level of where we're going here, because the companies often supply the open source developers, documentation, and everything else. So what is the best way for a company to help contribute a diverse group back to open source?
And you bring up a good point. More and more organizations, including companies, are very involved in open source. More projects are coming out of companies, and we are collaborating with projects from the company side. So everything from the projects that we work in and ensuring that we are positively contributing to the project. If the project does not have time for a code of conduct, helping with that, speaking about multiple contributions, and creating documentation and bringing, because companies have a lot of resources and have DE&I initiatives, have resources and research around all of this. We can bring that knowledge to the projects that need that knowledge. That's one way. The second is just conducting ourselves in a manner that is respectful and inclusive. Not only it brings goodwill for the company, but it also really speaks well of the company in the way you conduct yourself. And a couple of other ways. The third is any project that we set up in the company, for example, at Amazon, I'm sure Red Hat does the same thing and others do the same thing, is to set them up as good examples of inclusive projects, and everything from code of conduct to how we onboard people to how we include people to documentation, etc. And then the last one I'll say is I love sponsoring Outreachy or the Linux Foundation mentorships or Google Summer of Code, or there's Major League Hacking, which is doing sponsorships and mentorships, and GitHub has sponsorships. So companies can put their money to good use in sponsoring students, sponsoring underrepresented, and scholarships to travel and things of that nature. So they can do so much to make the world a lot more inclusive.
Yeah, and oddly enough, because, I mean, I started tweeting when I was with you in Houston many years ago. We haven't even touched on Grace Hopper and Open Source Day, which is a great place for students. This year we even had retirees, because it was virtual, that came and participated and learned about open source projects.
I love that.
And like I said, I mean, oddly enough, we hadn't even brought something like that up. You know, the Grace Hopper, with it going virtual, at least for Open Source Day, has made it a whole lot more open for people than versus you had to get one of those very few rare tickets and be there in person.
It's absolutely beautiful, and a bunch of volunteer students and young women at companies coordinate the entire Open Source Day. They look for champions, they look for sponsors, they set up sessions which help young students and women who want to enter open source. They've set up, lots of different sessions for that. They have a hacking day where they can actually practice what they learn. It's wonderful. I think that's something that companies can support in a big way. If you're looking for how do I support Grace Hopper such that it's practical and tangible and it results in some people coming out of it with skills and an on-ramp, if you will, to open source, like you were saying, it's Grace Hopper, because 17,000 people are there, and so you can do that.
Can I add also, because we do talk a lot about women and people from marginalized genders when we talk about diversity in open source. If you're going to Grace Hopper, which is huge and I think is very much agreed as a net good and something you should be doing, you should add Tapia to your list. That one specifically focuses on getting people of color into technology. So if you're don't stop with the women, keep going.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name.
Oh, Tapia.
Tapia.
One thing that I think companies can do to help here is it needs to be clearly messaged to employees that open source is not ancillary or an extracurricular activity. Because if you're somebody that's from an underrepresented group, you're probably experiencing imposter syndrome. And so that means that you're going to feel, you're not going to feel as confident to, say, ask for permission to go to a conference, or you're going to maybe be scared that if you spend your time doing something that's contributing to an open source project, maybe you're not going to get rewarded for that. And so I think if companies need to make it clear that open source is something that's part of employees' jobs and something that they will be rewarded for.
I completely agree that it's a first-class citizen, that it is a part of your technology education and workload, right? And more importantly, to your point, one of the reasons a lot of people, whether it's economically challenged or otherwise, don't get involved is lack of time. And they have to support families, they have to take care of lots of different things. So if you make it easy at work to contribute to open source, whether it's a day or it's part of your role and it's not something you're doing on in your spare time, then that's something that we can absolutely do through policy, through education of leadership, et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah, just to put an even finer point on it, we're not going to have a diverse open source community if it depends on volunteers, because the people who have time to volunteer already are have all these other advantages.
All right, we are about at 10 minutes. I'll bring you the microphone.
Just one quick comment to follow up on that. I think it's my dream. I hope one of those days for any school, or universities, if they can make open source a mandatory class for any computer science or EE major, at least they need to take one class in open source. I think that would be awesome. Then, because I wish I knew open source when I was in school or graduate school. I didn't, and nobody told me that until much later.
And you bring up a really good point. It is modern software development and modern hardware development and science, and so if you don't know how to use it, work with it, you're at a disadvantage.
Yes,
so. Yeah.
That would be my dream as well. my course is distributed, but my course also kind of depends on me bringing in a lot of speakers from industry, which is harder for people. I've got to find a way to just make a canned version of it that's distributed with guest lectures. But you're absolutely right. We, at one point in time when the university had the space available, I had basically an open source clubhouse, and people would just find us by accident. And I had one student start working with us and then just lose his mind in the middle of the room one day saying, I'm a senior in CS. Why have I not heard about this until now? And he just ranted for about 15 minutes. It was hilarious. So yeah, I feel your pain.
Yeah, hello, my name's Lee, UX designer at AWS. Yeah, you bring a really good point, because I get a lot of mentees that come to me and say, hey, I want to work on a new portfolio piece. I don't know how to get a job. Also, I'm a person of color. It's hard to get a job in this industry. I always say, like, hey, there's nothing stopping you from helping open source. There's nothing stopping you from doing an imaginary project or whatnot. But I think this is a really good point. Like, when I was in graduate school as well, I never knew about open source. I kind of vaguely had read about it on the internet, but didn't realize how welcoming and how good of an opportunity it is for people who are trying to come up out of school, or even just like finished school. I think that's another thing that open source kind of struggles with, right? Exposure.
Yeah, I mean, last year I made a slide deck that people could use in freshman seminar. I don't know if any of them ever did it or not, but it was about, here's what IP is, here's what copyright is, here's what licensing is. In your field, here's how open science works, here's how open this works. I gave it out and said, go ahead and it's made, you have the rights to edit it and take out the parts that aren't your major, and just, I don't know if they've used it or not, but I would love to see more of that happen. And in fact, we several of us here know a frequent open source contributor named Mel Chua, whose given name is Melanie. She's a deaf, first-generation Chinese Filipino-American who got into open source because she could do everything in the command line. And she would shock the contributors that she met in conferences in person because they assumed Mel Chua, or just Mel, was a guy. And here was this deaf Asian woman standing, you can't be Mel. No, really, I'm Mel. So the command line only, IRC gave a certain kind of opportunity for at least people who were literate in American English, right? It was also, for my deaf students, it was a flaw, because if you're typing non-grammatically, because deaf people experience written language differently than we do, it made them look, well, if you can't get your grammar right, you must be stupid. No, it's a different language. We have that problem with languages all the time.
All right, we've got about 2 minutes if people want to give final talks. And because we only have 2 minutes, if anyone else has any questions, maybe we'll stand out in the hall and answer them.
Sure, I can start with the final remark. Kind of in addition to exposure to the open source community or the idea of open source, I think it's also really important to have exposure to people who are like you in those spaces and in these leadership positions. I think that's especially important for marginalized or underrepresented communities to be able to see themselves or meet with folks from similar backgrounds who can understand. Like for me, my parents had a very, very different direction they wanted me to go in growing up, Latino, and that was not the direction I went. It took a lot for me to really see myself in not an attorney that my parents wanted me to go down that route. I almost did, but I pivoted to tech space, to the game space, and that was because I met people along the way who I looked at and I said, oh, okay, this is an actual opportunity for me as well.
To build on that, I think the more of us who can share our stories of how we got to where we are and what our journey was, and what kinds of things and resources there are to get into this space. Let's face it, technology is one of the highest paying and financially rewarding fields. I have a daughter in medical school, and I kept telling her, I think she's in the wrong field. She should she should really be, the four-year degree or computer science in general is such a, and we want more people to be uplifted and be in this space, not only because our space will be richer for it, but we want more of the wealth and benefits to go to other people. So I think the more stories we can tell and resources we can make available, the better.
There might still be hope, I hear, with this Open 3D thing. You might be able to be a digital doctor someday. So, just kind of saying, like, always opening the door and always making sure that you're, kind of looking at what is happening. And then offering that help, like if someone helped you and said, hey, like, I'll look at your talk, or I'll do a co-present with you if you've never done a conference before, or I'll give you the list of events that I think would be interesting for you, or the list of companies that are hiring stuff like your expertise. And so I think it's like demystifying that, making that part of it as transparent as we do the code so that you're constantly illuminating those opportunities, I think is really important.
I think we are at time.
Thanks, Amy.
Everyone for coming.